Men are outspending women when it comes to women's sports. At least that's according to a new report called The Cost of Fandom from Ally. And I think that there's actually one stat in that report that explains exactly what's going on here. Ally recently made a pledge to actually spend evenly on both women's and men's sports media, and it was a pretty unprecedented situation. You have to remember that back then, women's sports had not had the explosion that we've been seeing, especially across leagues like the WNBA and the NWSL. And before we saw these major media deals coming through for women's sports, Ally actually made a lot of difference when it came to the way women's sports were being broadcast. They did a multi-million-dollar deal with Disney when it came to their spending. However, they stated that 95% of their spending had to go towards women's sports, and they demanded that women's sports across the Disney outlets actually received better time slots. And another example of this was in 2022, where Ally worked with the NWSL and CBS to have the championship game air in prime time. And what's even more shocking about that is that it was the very first time in 2022 that a women's sports championship game had ever been broadcast in linear prime time. And so it makes sense that now, 4 years after that pledge, a lot of their focus in this report called The Cost of Fandom does focus on the way that people are spending money when it comes to women's sports. Roughly 1 in 3 millennial and Gen Z respondents said that spending in sports makes them feel connected to a community. And Gen Z specifically said that spending in women's sports feels like a reflection of their personal values. 40% of Gen Z respondents said that supporting women's sports is also a form of supporting gender equality. And the report does show that men are outspending women when it comes to women's sports on average annually. But another stat makes it pretty clear as to why. Overwhelmingly, women reported that they spend their time watching sports in a communal atmosphere, whether that's going to someone's house, going to a watch party, or going to a bar. Whereas men are more prone to travel further for sporting events and spend money on VIP in-stadium experiences. And I think there are two different things here. One is the pay gap between men and women overall, but also I think there's the element of community and what it's like to go to a stadium as a woman. Even when we talk about women's sports, especially as we see more and more men go to the stadium. The WNBA in particular had this experience, especially in Indiana and Chicago, where it became an actively hostile experience for female fans to be in the stadium. But I think even outside of the extremes, my experience with my friends who want to get into sports has been a hesitancy to actually attend a game in person because they're afraid that they don't know enough to do so, that they'll be judged for asking questions, and that there is an element of concern about what the environment will be like when they go. And I do think that this report actually shows that women do want to be connected to sports and the community, but that there is still something keeping women from feeling like that community is inside the stadium. And I think that this spending report can point to a bigger problem that we need to figure out when it comes to sporting culture. Have you felt like the in-stadium experience has changed over the last couple of years? And do you have anything that specifically keeps you from wanting to go to a game in person?